Uh, well, it's been many Fridays since I last met with my two colleagues here to give voice to more thoughts about life and my profession's life and my family's life and whatever it is I'm talking about from week to week. And as I remember it, I had gotten to the fourth of my four children and was talking about the joys and delights and challenges of raising the fourth one. And I stopped in the middle last time, so I will pick up there. So this is Raising Karen Part 2. And as I thought about getting back into this, I did listen to the preceding session, so I'm not sure exactly all the things I covered, but I know I got up into her young career as a psychologist and the fact that she had gone off to Washington as one of the final destinations of her preparation for her career and had been the assistant to Ed Markey. And one of the projects that was assigned to her was to get to work on the assault weapons ban and the legislation to try and bring that into existence in the United States. And she did a wonderful job. And for those of you who know anything about history, we did pass an assault weapon ban in the United States that lasted for 10 years. It couldn't be open-ended legislation. There was too much resistance to it, but the Congress was able to buy a 10-year period without importing or selling any assault weapons in the United States. And it expired in the early 2000s again, and we're still in misery because of it. But she was instrumental in making that happen. And in the course of that, she met a young man who was the legislative liaison for the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Fireworks Division of IRS. He was their connection with the Congress. He was there to alert ATS about legislation in Congress that would affect their operations or to advocate for them to and lobby for them to various members of the Congress if they had some legislation they wanted passed by the Congress to help them with their mission. And he was her contact person in trying to get IRS to advocate for the assault weapon ban and a relationship with each other. I think I said I used a metaphor for those of you like me who are very, very old. There were a bunch of zany romantic movies made in the 1930s where the two people who were eventually going to fall in love were violent adversaries about something and contending with each other all the time. And that was the story of my daughter's relationship with who became my son-in-law, Eric. They would argue with each other bitterly and endlessly about the legislation, its prospects, and what she was requiring and requesting of IRS to do by way of help. And he came to respect her wisdom, her talents, her livelihood, her loveliness. And when they were all finished with the legislation and they were ready to finally have a vote in the Congress, he asked if he could date her, and she willingly agreed. And they started to see each other. So somewhere after that, I forgot what year it was exactly. She was in her late 20s at this point, and we were going to Washington for an American Psychological Association convention, and we were going to spend some time with her, of course. And we decided we would go to the zoo together and do some other things because I love the Washington Zoo. It's a wonderful zoo. And she said she wanted us to meet Eric, the guy she was dating. We said, wonderful. We were thrilled. We had thought for the longest time that she was never going to settle in with anybody. She got involved in dating much later than most young people do, and that was characteristic of everything. She talked later, she walked later, she whatever were the things she was supposed to be doing. It took her goddamn good time to get around it. I don't think she had her first date until she was in her early 20s. And that's very unusual in her generation. But obviously interested in him. And he said he wanted to meet us and take us out for lunch. It was going to be his treat. So that felt good. I'm always glad to have somebody take me out to lunch. And We were to meet him and Karen on a street corner across the street from the restaurant, and he would shepherd us into the restaurant, and we would have lunch together. And I remember my impressions of him. A was that he was very intelligent. B, he was certainly handsome. He was nice to look at. And C, he had wonderful manners. He was very gracious with us. He took immediate control. There was a lot of traffic that day, and he walked out in the street and flagged cars down so that they would stop, so we could try to stop this, cross the street safely. That felt very, very caring to me, and I thought that's a lovely characteristic in somebody who's interested in my daughter. And then we sat down to have lunch, and the lunch was in a lovely outdoor patio on a wonderful summer day. But there was a problem because there was a bee buzzing around the table. And he said, "Don't worry, I'll get the bee." And we all paused and were quiet. And he waited until the bee landed on the table. And in a moment, he took a fork and stabbed the bee to death. And I was very admiring. He was very terrific in his gesture. I only found out a long time later that he had a horrible bee allergy, and he would wind up in the emergency room if he got bitten by bees. But here he was warding off the bee from his beloved and her parents. And that was really terrific. That was my first memory of Eric. So on life went. My daughter moved from being an intern working for Ed Markey. She had come to the attention of people on in the White House staff because they had used her to be the front person for the attack weapon legislation. And as her internship for Ed Markey came to a close, she was asked would she like to work for in the White House for the White House staff rather than work in the Congress, and uh, she would get a year's internship there, and she jumped at the chance because she could go on with her affair with Eric and stay in Washington, and she enjoyed being in government, and so they found a spot for her. She was taken on in a moment by the cabinet member who was responsible for science and technology policy. She had a PhD in the social sciences, so she was put to work helping to develop the television rating system for parents and to give testimony on what the dangers of not regulating television were, what we knew about the relationship between temper outburst, anger, and watching hours of violent television. She had become an expert on whatever literature there was about the social psychology, done by social psychologists on the relationship between hours of television watching and certain personality traits and character traits that would show up as a result. And she helped design the new system and had a really good time. One of the things she did was she went to China with President Clinton's wife, who wanted to start bringing women to China and doing something about the plight of Chinese women. So she was off on that sojourn to China, and she said the food was terrible. We get much better Chinese food in the United States than is served in the nicest restaurants in China. And she didn't like the president's wife very much. She was fascinated with Clinton. She knew that had horrible morality and was a sexual scumbag, but she admired his political skills and she admired his facility to govern wisely and intelligently and to get important legislation passed. So she had a wonderful objective view of the life of the president of the United States. And she was very much beloved of what was her name? Her first name was Marcy, the government official she was reporting to. I forgot. Her name will come back to me again soon. I'm having a senior moment. But her year's internship was coming up, and what was she going to do with herself? And Marcy was leaving government because Clinton was leaving office and would no longer be a cabinet member, and Marcy had been hired to be the provost at, no, what is the chief administrative officer on the UC campuses? I forgot what the name is. It's not dean, that's for one of the schools, but is she the provost? Whatever she was being hired to be in charge of the UC campus at Santa Cruz. And she asked Warren if she wanted to leave, if she was leaving government, would she come and be the assistant to her on the UC campus? Would she go into academic administration as the next challenge of her career? And my daughter was happy to get back to California, not so happy to leave Eric, but she had to get a job somewhere. She had no interest in going into clinical practice. She'd gotten soured on that. And the opportunity to be an academic administrator tickled her. She was going to be in charge of the Division of Public Policy in the university, and that was going to be her assignment. And off she went, and she spent 2 years. Marcy Greenwood, that was her name. She is still, as far as I know, the chief administrative officer at UC Santa Cruz. So she worked for 2 years there, and then she decided she would try and get herself back to Southern California. And Marcy said she would try and pull some strings for her at UCLA, and she did so. And my daughter returned to Southern California to reside in the area again. We were happy to have her home. And her appointment was to be the assistant dean for public policy in the School of Public Policy and Social Work at UCLA. She was the assistant dean, reporting to a dean. And she worked there for about 6 years. During this period of time, she and Eric were having a long distance relationship, and he was burning out his career in government. He didn't like being the legislative liaison for the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division of the IRS anymore. It wasn't sufficiently challenging, sufficiently important, and it was a nowhere career that led to nothing particular from there. So he made a decision that he would try and go back to school. He thought he wanted to get an MBA. He had an undergraduate degree in political science, but he thought he would get an MBA, and maybe since he had had extensive government experience, he might get a job with one of the consulting firms who need people who know something about how government works. And they're consulting with people in the private sector who are doing business with the government. So his background would be of some help. And he was accepted at the Anderson School at UCLA. So off he comes to join his beloved, and they had a rent controlled apartment here in Santa Monica, and they took up residence together. They started living together, and we saw them frequently. They would like visiting with us. We would often go to events of one sort or another. We'd go out to dinners together, and I enjoyed my what was to be my son-in-law to become. And I didn't appreciate that he was carrying serious psychological wounds that weren't apparent for a long time, but I had no reason to treat him like a client or to try to search for what were the difficulties he was bringing. He seemed like a pleasant enough person, very appreciative, very forthcoming and kind to my wife and I, interested in spending time with us, full of interesting conversations, mainly about politics when we would get together. And uh, he had a Jeep. I mean, he had a Jeep wagon, and I had a classic Jeep Wrangler. So we were fellow Jeep owners, and he would ask. He knew that I had spent time working on cars in high school and early in college, so he would ask me questions about the maintenance of his automobile, and I would say, "Well, there's some things you could do yourself. I'd be glad to show you how to do that. You want to learn about how to change the oil, to change the oil filter, or change the water pump if you need to. I can show you how to do all those things and save you some money with going to mechanics." So we became mechanical buddies together. And one day he said he wanted to talk to me. I said, "Oh, okay. Well, I need to reset the carburetor. I'm having carburetor problems on my car. You want to come by? I'll show you how to adjust carburetors and get them to work properly. And we can talk while we're working on my carburetor." He said, "That's fine." So he came over. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we're fixing the carburetor. And I got the car to purr and to run quietly. And he said, "I need your permission about something." I said, "Well, you need my permission about something? That's interesting. What do you want my permission for?" And he said, "I want permission to marry your daughter." I said, "What?" And he said, "I want your permission to marry your daughter." And I said, "You don't need my permission to marry my daughter. My God, have you asked her for her permission to marry her?" That that seems more important than whether you have my permission or not. He said, "Well, I grew up in the South, and that's what people do in the South. They ask the father's permission to marry the daughter before they propose to the bride." I said, "Oh, yeah, all right. I understand that's your cultural tradition. It certainly isn't mine." I think Karen's down on the beach right now. I think she went surfing down on the local beach. Would you have my permission? You don't need my permission. I enjoy time with you. She'll be much wiser about whether she should marry you than I could ever be. So please get the fuck, go take the hike down on the beach down there and go ask my daughter if she's willing to marry you. And I quickly ran into the house and I said, "They're going to get married." I said, "The child we thought would never grow up." So absolutely, he proposed to her and she agreed to marry him. And marry they did. Uh, Now I'm getting sad because there were many things about it that were good, and there were things about it that weren't good. Uh, I learned more about Eric's background. Uh, he was the child of a Vietnam era military people. His father had been a fighter pilot person who was flying off the deck of a carrier during the Vietnam War and bombing villages and giving support to the troops wherever he could with his guns. And he had a best friend. And no, I'll take that. Yes, he had a best friend. The best friend was married to somebody, and Eric's father and the man's wife started having a love affair, and the Eric's biological father, who had been the man who had been the biological father of that union, found out that his wife had been betraying him with his best friend, and he too was a gallant Southerner. And his solution to the problem was he filed for divorce and he gave the couple, the affair couple, his blessings to marry each other and to normalize things. And he would drop out of his son's life. So he actually disappeared. He stopped having anything to do with Eric, and Eric was abandoned by him, and Eric became the stepson who later adopted him of the other Marine pilot. And they subsequently had two more children. So he had two half siblings, a sister and a brother. And I think he always ached from the abandonment of his biological father. He knew very little about him, only that he had been a pilot, just like his new adoptive father was, and that he was 1/4 Native American Indian. He didn't know of which tribe. And that's all he knew about him. He didn't know what happened to him subsequently. He could not find out whether he ever remarried, whether there were some other siblings he had tucked there somewhere in the world. And he didn't want to know. He was quite embittered by having been left. And it turned out that he was a very embittered child growing up. He always felt like he didn't quite belong in the family that he was in, that the other two children belonged there better, and that they were really much more favored by the who had adopted. and his biological mother. And he was always asked, as the oldest, to subordinate himself. His little brother would come and take his toys and play with them and break them, and nothing was ever done. He was expected to be grown up about it and to know that the little one was only being a child, and that Eric was to try and be gracious about it. And he was constantly being lectured on how he had to grow up, become mature, and be gracious. And that what really mattered was indulging the other two children. That seems to have been the family script. And he was very wounded by that script to an extent I didn't know. One of the things I found out later was he had said to my daughter when he proposed to her, he had reservations about the institution of marriage. She didn't think his parents' marriage after all those years was a particularly good one. They were drunk frequently. They were partners in boozing, and he didn't see a lot of real affection between the two of them, or much closeness between the two. He wasn't a big fan of the institution of marriage, but he was willing to take a chance and see if he could create a different marriage with my daughter. But he wanted to make it clear he was not interested and would never be interested in becoming a father. They were going to have a childless marriage with each other. And in the beginning, she agreed. She thought it would be okay. There was enough goodness. She was interested in her career. It would be a relief not to have to divide herself and raise children. And they would make out okay as well as they could. And on they went into their 30s. He did get his degree from the Anderson School. He got his MBA, and he was hired by one of the major consulting firms. And we were coming up on the year 2000, and the rage was the fear of software crashing on the year 2000, because a lot of it had been written with two-digit years in the software. And the consulting firms were making big money sending people who understood the software business and trying to convert and update the software of the companies before January 1st of the year 2000, to avoid major meltdowns in American corporations as their software they were using crashed. So he was frequently on the road. He himself was not an expert on writing software, but he knew that the company he worked for had several different versions of software available, and people who had written it who he could contract with the customers to have come in residence and do the job for them. He would make the match between resources he had in his own company and the needs of the people he was consulting with. And he got into a real funk because Boeing in Seattle was one of their major clients, and he was asked to leave home and take up residence there so he could oversee whoever was the techie who was going to come up and write the software, an interface between the techie and the company and the Boeing company, and solve problems as they may come up, and help the sides to talk to each other and arrive at a good resolution. So for several months, he was lonely up there and could only come home occasionally on a weekend. Of course, Boeing flew him home at no cost. He was able to ride first class, coming back and forth to visit with his wife, but he didn't like it. And he thought it was going to be romantic to be on the road frequently, going to fine hotels and being lodged by his own company, his consulting firm, and having exotic clients to consult with. But it turned out he found it very, very grinding. And he thought he had made a mistake. He did not want to go ahead being in management consultation and living that kind of life. So what was he going to do now? His next thought was he was going to go back and get a law degree. That was the next stop. And my daughter was earning enough money, and he had saved enough money, so they could manage to fund that. He could knock off for 3 years and go to law school and pay the tuition, and they would make out okay. They continued to live in their little rent controlled apartment in Santa Monica. Their overhead was not very great. She was making a nice salary from UCLA, and as a matter of fact, he got in-state tuition because he got into the UCLA Law School, and there were perks because she was an executive in the structure of the university. And off he went to law school. And as he got close to getting finished, he had picked what kind of law he wanted to go into. He wanted to be a real estate lawyer. And I could never understand him. He would tell me what his work consisted of. I couldn't understand how he didn't go bored out of his gourd. His whole life consisted of reading documents. He would sit in an office by himself, and his job was to look at offers, to look at partnership agreements, to look at escrow papers, to look at mortgage documents, and to read them very closely to make sure there were no mistakes in them. And that if the client who had hired the law firm services was being disadvantaged in some way by what was being proposed that the client signed, he would come up with the fix. What should be rewritten so it would be better and take better care of the client, and what things the client should absolutely refuse to sign. But his whole life, and he didn't carry on those conversations with the client. He would tell whoever was representing the client in his firm, his job was only to look at papers and to fix them and to make recommendations about the papers he looked at. So for 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours a day, he was in a cubicle looking at papers. And I don't understand how he didn't go crazy, but he seemed to love it. He loved catching other people's mistakes. That was the highlight of his day, if he found at least one serious mistake in one of the documents that he was looking at. And he began to feel his wounds more. And he said, I know you can't be my therapist, but I like talking to you. Can I just see you occasionally? And when I'm troubled about something, are you willing to talk to me about it? I said, well, I'll be glad to make you a referral to somebody. He said, no, I just want to talk to you. I don't want any formal treatment. I don't need to go through that. If I just have a dilemma, can I talk to you? I can't talk to my father. He doesn't understand much about the world, but you're my father-in-law, and would you spend time with me? I said, yeah. So that became a feature of our lives. Once or twice a month, he would make some time, usually soon after breakfast. He would come to my office at 8 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock in the morning. And he'd have some interpersonal dilemma or some fear that was troubling him. And we would talk about it for an hour or so, and then he would go back off to work. And I learned much more about the wound of his abandoning father, about his resentment of his siblings. He really did not like them. He thought they were not very pleasant people. His reservations about his father, his trying to figure out how to have a decent but distant relationship with his father, not banish them from his life, but somehow not get ensnared in their craziness. For instance, since we were not Christians and his family was, it was a tradition in his family that the children go with their spouses and later on with their children, and they would spend time in his parents' house for Christmas. That's where Christmas would be celebrated. And there would always be a horrible fight. That was part of it. And frequently there was a fire. There was a fire in the kitchen that they had to put out with a fire extinguisher because one or another of the parents had got drunk and forgot about what was on the stove or anything. So it was a nightmare going to visit his family. And that was a frequent topic of conversations. Did he dare hurt his parents and stop the ritual of showing up at Christmas time and at Easter and for other holidays? Uh, as is not surprising, as my own daughter got towards her middle 30s, she started to reconsider what she had made an agreement about. She started feeling how much she wanted to have children. By this time, her older sister had two, and she was used to having two nephews and to enjoy their family life and visiting with them in Northern California, up in Eureka, and having them visit down here. And she felt the emptiness of not having children of her own. And she would say to her mother and to myself frequently, I would be a very good mother. And I agreed with her. I knew she would be a very good mother. And after pulling at Eric for some months, she finally got him to agree that he would consent to trying what it was like to become a parent. But he warned her not to expect him to be very involved in the life of the infant if she really wanted to do that. And they proceeded. And the years of their later 30s started to evaporate. Oh, he was 2 years younger than she was. That's right. I forgot to mention that. So she was pushing 40 and they were having fertility problems. They couldn't get pregnant. And I knew the anguish of that from my first marriage. And so I was very sympathetic and I kept talking to them about the pains they were going through, asking them, was there anything their mother and I could do to help? And they found very good fertility specialists. And it turned out with some chemical treatments and with doing in vitro fertilization, they were able to fertilize some eggs successfully. And they froze 8 eggs. And they said, when you're ready, you need to recover from what we've done to jazz you up to make bigger egg production. When your system calms down in several weeks, we will take 2 of the eggs and we will inseminate you. And you may have twins. It's most likely that one of the embryos won't implant, and you'll probably only have one child, but you have to be ready. Are you ready to receive twins? Of course, you can always abort one of the 2 embryos while they're in you. That's kind of dangerous and risky, but it can be done. Or you can agree to have twins. And they decided, what the hell, they would roll the dice and they would have twins if twins were to eventuate. And that's exactly what happened. A few days on the other side of my daughter's 40th birthday. She always does everything late. They gave birth to two twins. How many twins are there other than 2 twins? And they were fraternals. One was female and one was male. And the female is the older one, and the male is the younger one. And it didn't turn out this way, but there was a wonderful metaphor for her. She was on top of him all during the pregnancy, and she came out first, and he was kind of squashed and, and been out of shape by having had her oppressing him all the time he was in the embryo. It took him several days to straighten himself out. And I remember she had to have a C-section in order to give birth to the twins successfully. I remember soon after we were told that everything was fine. The babies were in the nursery now. She had already nursed them for the first time, and she was resting quietly in her room. If we wanted to see him, we could go down to the nursery and see the 2 of them. And I remember my granddaughter was asleep. She looked adorable and she was so cute and sleeping very peacefully like a little angel. And he was wide awake and wide eyed. And he was looking like this. Oh my God, what happened to me? Where am I? And I started laughing. I started talking to him through the glass. Oh my God, you really don't know what's happened to you. This is like nothing you've ever experienced. And it's the start of the craziest chaos, pain, confusion, love, blessings. Oh boy, you've gotten yourself into here. I don't blame you for being in a panic about it. I'll try to help as much as I can. I yelled at him through the glass. Oh, so that was the beginning. Uh, in some ways, I remained probably closer to Eric than I did to my own daughter. He sought me out more. I talked to him more. My daughter was busy with her career. Somewhere in the 5th year of her being at UCLA, one of the professors who had been in those programs she was supervising had been hired away by USC, and she was friends with him. She liked talking to him and found him very pleasant to have conversations with. And they went out to lunch one day, and he said, life is really much better at USC. Would you consider leaving UCLA and switching over? You'll get paid much better. You'll get treated better. The retirement benefits are much better. In every way, faculty are much happier, more content, and more productive here than they are at UCLA. Would you consider? shifting over. And she said, well, yes, I have to take care of my career. I'm not going to rule anything out. Can I learn more about where the openings are and what might be possible for me? So he arranged a variety of interviews by various kinds of people at USC where they could talk to her and get a sense of who she was and what kind of talent she had, what her history had been, and she could see what kinds of opportunities might be at USC for her. And uh, the most powerful visit she had was at the Annenberg School of Communications. One of the members, one of the Annenbergs, as a matter of fact, and a member of the board of trustees of the institution, was very taken with her, and he was taken with her ability to take on novel projects and make them succeed. He was thinking about her legislative and administrative efforts when she was in the government, and then some things she had made happen at UCLA. And he said his personal quest, since this was the Annenberg School of Communication, was that the Annenberg School had paid no attention up until now with the digital age, and there was no curriculum about it and no programs about the rise of social media in the digital age. And he asked her, would she be up for designing a master's degree curriculum that would give a master's degree in social media? Would she design the curriculum, figure out what kinds of instructors she needed to hire the instructors, figure out what the admissions processes would be for students who wanted to take those courses, and start the program and be the chairperson of the program? And that sort of tickled her. She really wanted to do that, and off she went. She left UCLA and she became the director of the Annenberg School's program in social media. And she did that for another several years before she burned it out and went on to something else. But she has become what? Several things. She has become a big public figure. She's on national television frequently. She gets quoted in op-ed pieces in the New York Times. She is the guru that anyone turns to if there is a media issue that's come up. Of course, they talked to her a lot when Trump was banned from the media. Whatever is the issue that the media are now struggling with, being sued about, being regulated by Congress about, she is the person who gets interviewed about what is happening, what is this about, what are the problems and what are the solutions. In addition, for some other reason, the athletic department loves her. Her courses are very popular with football players. They love taking her courses, and the recruiters for the various sports in the athletic department love her too, because one of the things that parents often ask if their children are being recruited by the athletic departments, what kind of education are they getting? And after all, they're probably not going to be necessarily sports figures for the rest of their lives. They're going to get their education, and a good portion of them are going to have to go back into the private sector doing something. Will they be well educated? And she is the voice of the educational package at USC, and she promises the parents that the athletic department is very committed to making sure that they are student athletes, with the emphasis on students, and the program is very rigorous to make sure they get the tutoring they need, the classes they need, and that they actually get an education, and that they're not just hired guns to do sports. And she is the spokesperson for that. What else has she gotten into? She's now also an expert witness. There have been many lawsuits involving something to do with social media, and she gets called into court to give expert witness testimony about how the social media works, who has the right or wrong of what the litigation issues are about, and she gets paid thousands of dollars. She makes huge amounts of money being an expert witness in lawsuits involving the social media. So I am very proud of her. She is a force to be reckoned with, and she is a public authority in her own way, and she is an excellent, excellent mother. Now, things began to get more troublesome between my daughter and her husband. Uh, he would start complaining, and I was in a terrible position with him. He'd start complaining she doesn't really understand me. She's too involved with her career, too involved with the children. He became what he had obviously been a threat of becoming. He became a rival and very jealous of his children. He was probably right. He probably should not have had children. He could be very cruel to them if they annoyed him. I was out at dinner with him frequently with my wife and the kids, and he would yell at them very loudly and frighten them. And often, when all of us were together as a family with my kids, the grandkids there, they would be very quiet. They would be trying to stay on their father's good side, not speak up very much, be well behaved, almost invisible. And he would hold forth about topics that were of interest to him and ask everybody to understand what was interesting in his life and to affirm him and pay attention to him. He was not very nurturing to them. In addition, he went berserk. He bought himself thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars of children's toys, and he would decide what toys they would play with, and they would be toys that he would play with them together, and they would be his toys too. He purchased over 1,000 different complex Lego sets. And one of the things he would tell them that they were going to do is they were going to knock off whatever else they were doing. And the three of them were going to assemble the Legos together. And he would scold them if they were not competent enough or not quick enough. And after a while, he would tell them, "You guys don't understand this at all. This is important. Go, just leave. I'll finish assembling this myself." So the house was filled with children's toys. He had to have two different Christmas trees, a big tree for the adults and a small tree for the children and the children's gifts that were going to be given to them at Christmas time. And it made my wife and I very sad to watch this, that it was only one parent who could take any real joy out of the presence of two kids who were obviously very talented and very lovable in their own ways. And he began to drink more and more. He had become a wine aficionado. He was traveling with wealthy clients often and out to for pricey restaurants. He developed a taste for wines. He started reading about wines. He had now a wine cellar in his basement, and he had a wine refrigerator with just the right temperature in his kitchen. And he would try and find good wine bargains and try to educate all the rest of us about how to manage wine and what wines we should appreciate. And he was drinking probably at least 2/5 of wine every day of his life, uh, one with dinner and then one later in the evening. And I was worried about his health. And he started to get a pot belly from all the extra calories he was drinking. And on two occasions, it got worse. He was he spent some of his time. He had the firm that he worked for had offices both in San Francisco and in Los Angeles. While he was mainly here, he had made friends with one of the partners in the San Francisco office and occasionally needed some intense time from him looking at some documents. And he would go spend a day or two or three up in the San Francisco office and stay in a hotel. Well, he was flying back from being in San Francisco on United Airlines, and he went unconscious in his seat. He just keeled over, and nobody knew for sure what happened to him. Uh, they had an ambulance meet the plane when it landed at LAX, and he was transported to a hospital, and he had a whole bunch of tests, and it was unclear what was wrong. They couldn't find anything wrong. He regained consciousness, and our family physician started to monitor him much more. And it seemed like he was in the early stages of having some kind of cardiac problems of unspecifiable origin yet, but with some skip beats, and maybe he would have to have a pacemaker put in at some point. He was under review, and he didn't respond well to the health challenges. By this time, his own parents were so impaired as alcoholics that they had to sell their house and go to a skilled nursing facility because they were just making themselves blotto every day of the year. Both of them had retired, and they were doing nothing but drinking together and laughing and carrying on, or yelling and having vicious fights with each other in their drunkenness. That was their life. Uh, so we were worried about the trajectory of Eric's life. And then he told me he slipped. He said, I'm not sure that my wife is good for me. I don't think she knows how to soothe me enough or be kind enough to me. And I don't know if I should stay with her. I started seeing a psychiatrist, and he's convinced me that I'm with the wrong woman. And unless she learns how to take better care of me, I probably shouldn't stay with her. And I said, do you have any responsibility to take care of her or of your children? He said, I bring home the money, he said. She should know how to soothe me. She should know how to keep me moving so that I can do the work I need to make the family happen. That's my job. Very traditional male values he was spewing out at me. And I guess he had a psychiatrist who was supporting him in those values. Well, fate is always very strange. 2 years ago, his law firm did what it usually did. It was going to have, oh, he made partner along the way. 3 years ago, he made partner. And now he felt more affirmed. And you buy a partnership. So he had to lay out a bunch of money, but it was going to be returned to him over the years because now he would get profit participation in return for his buying into the partnership. And their standard of living was going to improve after this first year of sacrifice. He borrowed the money. They refinanced the house, so he had a bigger mortgage payment. That's where he had to pay $80,000 for the partnership interest. But they were going to make out okay. So he was going to go off to the partners retreat meeting, and it was held at the Terranea Hotel on the Palos Verdes Peninsula. And what they were going to have was the managing partners had hired a team building specialist who was going to come and take them through team building exercises. So they checked into the hotel the night before. The first exercise was going to be in the morning. And he and some of his colleagues had brought many fine bottles of wine, and they were going to get ready for the day's activities by sampling various excellent wines on the way to getting sleepy. They were up to probably 2 or 3 in the morning, and I'm sure they got quite snockered, and then they went to bed, and they were to report in for this event. There was a buffet breakfast, and then they were going to have the first event. And the first team building event was a variation of musical chairs. The music was going to be played. There were various pieces of furniture in this large room in the hotel, that ballroom that they had to carry on their activities. There were some tables that were put in it, and there were chairs that were put in it. And when the music stopped, everybody had to get up on a piece of furniture so that they weren't touching the floor. And they had to go at a fast pace in a circle around all the furniture and then rush to get up on a piece of furniture. And since it was team building, if there was somebody who seemed to be left behind, they could struggle and help that person to get up on whatever piece of furniture they were on, either pull them up with them in the armchair or get them up on the table they had hopped up on and perched on. So Eric was engaged in doing that, and one of the elderly partners was Eric was up on a table, and one of the elderly partners was having trouble getting up on the table as the music was obviously going to be turned off, and Eric was laboring to lift him up, and instead Eric fell down, and Eric struck his head on the way down off the off the table he was perched on, and he was unconscious. And they couldn't seem to get him awake. Somebody called 911 and a report was made to the paramedics. It took 25 minutes from the nearest paramedics to get to the hotel. And they said he had to be taken to the hospital. There was no pulse. They tried to resuscitate him, but his pulse was not working. And from Palos Verdes Peninsula, they took him to a hospital in Culver City. It was about 35 or 40 minutes by the time they were able to get off the Palos Verdes Peninsula and get him to the place they were taking him to. And he was declared dead on arrival. And they could not resuscitate him. No attempts succeeded. And so my daughter was called, and somebody in the ER told her, "I'm really sorry, your husband has just been brought here, but something has happened to his circulatory system. We're not quite sure, but all attempts to resuscitate him failed, and we have legally declared him dead now. And please come and make arrangements for what you want to do with the body." And she was confronted with what to say to the children, how to hold herself together, how to get there, what to do with the body, all the rest of that. And several of the partners had followed the ambulance to the hospital, so that they had been there all that while. They were there waiting to give her some kinds of emotional support or be helpful in any way possible. But my ugly secret is, as we finally got a mortuary to come and take the body away, and we spent some time, my wife and I spent some time with the children trying to talk to them about what had happened to them and their father's death, and to get them ready for life without a father, and to get them ready to leave, while Karen was busy with all the administrative crap she had to go through. Uh, it was just heartbreaking. But at some point, I took my wife aside and I said, maybe this is good. Maybe this is a blessing. Uh, we had often said to Karen, he's a difficult man to live with. He's uncertain he should be married to you. If you ever decide that you would like to separate from them, we'll be as much practical and emotional help to you as we possibly can, including babysitting for you, being with the children, doing anything we can to fill in for the the fatherlessness that the children would have to go through at least part-time. And I said, I'm particularly sensitive to that because I grew up without a father. I think I could talk to them well and see if I could be of help to them if you decide to do that. No, I married him for better or worse. We'll get through hard time. I'll keep trying and we'll get through it. But she was spared. She didn't have to get through it. He went off into death. Uh, so since then, it's been miraculous. Since he loves Santa Monica Beach, we actually got a permit to have a memorial service for him right there on the beach in Santa Monica. And over 100 people were there, from people he'd gone to school with. His family, of course, was there, his siblings and his drunken parents, who didn't come to the ceremony, but we rented one of the houses that was open right there on the beach, and everybody we had a meal there that everybody could partake after the ceremony. And his parents just stayed in that space. They didn't even come to his memorial service. They were drunk out of their minds. And I gave a memorial speech and a eulogy for him, just say nothing but good about the dead. And I said nothing but good about the dead. And many other people spoke of him and what he had meant to them. And we tried to put it behind. And my daughter has blossomed. She's more at peace. She may be, she says, getting ready maybe to start dating. It's been almost 2 years since he died. She's been very busy watching over her children. And what's really been amazing is, God, have they blossomed? They're talking all the time. They're clamoring for attention. They're very wonderful kids. They think about interesting things. When we go out to dinner with them, they can't wait to get our attention and talk. All the subdued characteristics we saw in them because they had to defer to their father are gone. And they've been liberated by what's an oppressive person, and they get the presents that they want at holiday time, and all the Legos are going to be sold eventually, and all those toys that they had no interest in are going to be cleared out of their condo. And she's redecorating it now. She's putting in new bathrooms and painting it different colors and changing the feel of the environment there. And on top of everything, the 17-year-olds are about to go away to college, and they're filled with filling out their college applications. My grandson is unbelievable. He wants to be a screenwriter. That is his ambition, and he's probably a little on the spectrum. He lives in fantasy land. He's always watching fantasy movies and reading fantasy books and writing scripts and writing his own books about other worlds. And he applied supposedly the most highest rated creative writing program in the country academically, of all places, is a program that's at the Chicago Art Institute. They do two things. They have programs in fine arts and art history, and they train writers. And he did an early acceptance thing with them, and they wanted samples of his writing, and they wanted poetry. They wanted potential advertising writing. They wanted any screenplays he's written. They wanted the plots of novels he was interested in writing. He put in a thick notebook that was about 2 inches thick for anybody who wanted to read his writing, and it was all his writing. He got immediate early admission and an $80,000 stipend without his having asked for any financial aid whatsoever. So he's assured that he can go there. I'm not sure that's his first choice program, but he is feeling very valued and very wanted. And I have no doubt that my granddaughter, who has gone on to become, she is the student editor of the student newspaper, and she wants to be a journalist, and she writes beautifully too. And she writes really interesting stories about current events and about political events in the country that's published in the high school newspaper. So I'm quite proud of her too. She's a force to be reckoned with. I'm going to cry. I love them both very much. And I'll be sorry to see them go away for 4 years if that's what they do. I've just been getting to know them well over the last year and a half since their father died. So that's okay. That's the story of my raising Karen. And I hope she finds the courage to find a second husband for herself. I would like her to do that and to have somebody who's really a partner and who cherishes her as she deserves to be cherished, because she's one of the most worthwhile people that I know in this world. I'm very proud of her. And I cannot tell you how resilient she was and how she stood in with kindness and presence and let the kids be sad and cried with them, but sustained them and cherished them and called them forth into a better future. Maybe even one day I'll have a conversation with them when they're well into adulthood, if I can live that long, about how it may have been a blessing in disguise that their father died. Oh, I left off the most practical thing. Karen is now also a very rich woman. There was no medical scanning or getting any medical history from the participants in that crazy exercise. She successfully prosecuted a wrongful death suit in which the law firm was one of the litigants in the thing, plus the guy who ran this crazy workshop, and the insurance company that the law firm had, and the insurance company that the leader of the exercises had. And she got millions of dollars in a wrongful termination suit. So she'll never have to worry about her own retirement or future or taking care of the children and whatever they want to do with their lives. She's wealthier than I will ever be in the forever or could ever imagine being forever. She got many millions of dollars. That takes worry away from me. If we run out of our own money, she's already told us she'll never let us have a bad life. She'll make sure we have a good life for the rest of our lives, and it won't matter much to her at all. She'll even watch over her sister, who is a crazed spendthrift who can't budget anything. All right. That's the end of that story, and I will go on to something else next week, but you can unmute yourselves now.
It's a very sad story regarding Eric, Arthur, but it seems like Karen is resilient, and she's almost like a hero in terms of the story you tell, and it's like I want to go out and help her for what you from the tale you tell. So it's like, you know, the story continues.
Well, if you know any Elegant guys in their 50s, I can give you her contact information. I think that's the most helpful thing she needs right now. And that's going to be particularly even more true starting in September, when it's likely that the two children who have given her a focus and a purpose to her life now are going to be gone. And she's going to be in total emptiness by herself.
Yeah, that'll be a big adjustment. I'm facing it myself.
Yeah, your kid's about to depart.
Yeah. Yeah,
Just
I think
another chapter for her.
Yeah.
We could bottle Kovacs Resilience. I think we'd have a big best-selling product.
I do love her. So the fourth child I came to raise turned out to bring me the most joy.
It's a very dear story.
Yeah.
Once in a while, I say to her, "You'll never know how much I really love you." And then I start crying.
Oh, maybe she does know then.
I'm sure she does.
All right. Thank you for listening to me. And I will be back with probably more profession-oriented materials next week again.
Sounds good.
Okay. We'll see you.
Have really lovely weekends.
You too.
You too.
All right.
Bye.
Be well. Bye.
Bye, guys.